All right, so welcome to part 2 of this tutorial where we're going to look at a series of operations that cut solid objects with a plane away from another object. This tutorial is developed for the Simulation and Prototyping course at Lawrence Technological University. And we're starting up where we left off with the previous tutorial, where we looked at the creation of this three-dimensional object. And so what I want to do next is to just show you a couple tips on how I started to break out to show the different steps from this, right? So that we could visualize these things. So let's start with, I'm orienting it so that it's positive X and positive Y, so we can see where we might go from here. And we know that our box is 5. So let's just look at moving our box in the X direction. We'll see how much to move it, but let's just move our standard start with the full box. And I know that our center box is 5, but it kind of makes me think that it might be 10. So let's start with 10. I don't know, we'll go to 50. We'll see what makes sense. So if we move it 10, that's exactly touching the next box. If we move it to 20, that leaves exactly one box between it. So that seems to make sense to me that we'll use 20 as a unit. I actually want to move, in this case, in the opposite direction. And maybe what I'll do is I'm going to move all of this up to the top as a kind of starting condition up here. So what I want to do is just go from the kind of solid box and then take a series of chunks away from it. And I want to move it in the other direction. So I think I just realized rather than multiplying by a -1, there's also a really simple component called negative. We can do that and it'll move it to the other side. I wonder if value, can we just set this to be, that doesn't let us set a value. So we'll leave that at 20 and we'll actually use 20 for all of these. And the reason why I wanted to put it up here is that then I can plug this geometry. Oh, I want to hold down Shift, plug this geometry not into there, but into here. So now we get, and you can see the colors are off a little bit, and this is because the move is still previewing. All right, so now we get a simple pink volume. The next step is we have the wireframe. And what we could do, since we have the wireframe up here, we could do a series of wireframes to give us our framework to have that representation. So why don't we do that? We have our wireframe here. We know that we're going to move 20 in the X direction. Let me show you one other thing while we're here. I don't want this to be negative. So we want that to be 20, that direction. And the geometry that we want is the pipe. Let's see if I did this correctly. And then we'll feed this back into here. So we got another one. And what we could do is just to add a multiplication. Our components are big because I have them text fully displayed. Is that I could multiply this times 2 for each option that we have and plug that in. And actually I could come down and I could set multiple data items, 3, 4, 5. And that'll create all of those that we need. We can always come back and reduce some of them by taking away some of those numbers. So there we have a series of wireframes that we can work within. Now what we want to do is actually to extract, because with our previous thing that we've done, and let's see, here's our solid difference. Here's our planes. So we have 12 planes. So if we come all the way back over to here, we can see the cut plane quantity is 12. Let's dial this down to 4 or 5. Coming through the plane through shape, we have 5 of these. So what we could do is extract each one. And actually what we want to do is to partition the list for each version. And this will make sense in a second, but there's a nice, as I said, we have a number of list functions where we've used a couple of them before. We've grabbed single items, we've done other things. What we're going to do this time is to partition the list. And just as a, let's see, I'll use a couple panels just as a way to introduce this as a topic. Let's just take our set of random numbers that comes first over here. We have a list with 5 items in it. If we partition the list, I'll use those same random numbers. Is it partition or do I want something else? I want to split a list. So I'll get an A list and a B list. And then we put 2 panels over here, and we can see exactly what happens with the A list and the B list. A, B, and we'll pull in the same data into our list. We can see nothing's happening yet because it needs an index number. So let me make 0 less than 1 less than 5. And watch what happens as I move the slider. So when it's set to 1, it's allowing into the A output just the first value. And 0 is, it breaks because it has nothing. So when we go to 1, you can see as I move to 2, 3, 4, and 5, now the B list is empty. And so what we're going to do is we're going to extract from our list up above using the split list to make an output of just the first cut. Then the next one will be the first 2, and the third one will be the first 3. And so because we want this to be cumulative, and they build up across the width of the display that we see on the right. So split list is a great way to do that, to split one list into 2 different chunks. So hopefully that makes sense. And you can see the numbers aren't changing. All we're doing is just sorting them differently. They stay in the same order, and they're the same numbers. So I'm going to delete those lists, or sorry, those panels. And for our first box here, we want to have this split list set to 1. When we go to the second one, we'll have the split list set to 2. And we'll see the way that these play out in different ways. So we also don't need that tied to there. We're actually going to pull in the data from the plane. Right now we see all of the planes that are here. And we're only cutting the first one. We'll do it for a second one. Actually, we shouldn't be seeing, not really seeing any of those things yet. We'll set this one to 2. And we'll use our A list to be fed You know what? Let's even just copy these. This over. We'll move these over. We've got plenty of room to work, and we can start to bring these together. But for now, let's take our A list, feed that into our flip, and then that'll come into our representation here. And that's okay. We can hide our split list. And that's fine. This is all happening right here. Can actually hide this split list. And we have our first looks like we're still seeing the others. So maybe I was supposed to use partition. Let's see. Let's go back and do the same thing. There are instances where we do want to use the split list where we want both. But in this case, if we just want the list panel, maybe we don't want the second bit of numbers. This gives us the entire list, but it just gives us a partition between those. So that's not really what we want. So we'll leave this alone. Oh, I think we're seeing the other set of things. I know what we're seeing. We're seeing this. That's what confused me. So I turn off that preview. Now what we're seeing is just the first cut. So what we need to think about with this second operation, if we want to see within the second box here, we can copy these, but we're also going to have to move these. And when I say move, I'm not talking about the component. I'm actually talking about the object in Rhino. But that's okay. So we'll take the A list, we'll plug it in here. We have this representation. We know this is set to number 2, but let's also move this over. So we have to do the move before we do the representation. Here's the result, is the geometry, that geometry, and we're going to move it in the X direction. We know it'll be positive, and it's going to be 20. So we can just do that for the slider, plug that in. So now we get the first and the second cut from the object. And you can just, I don't know that I necessarily need to repeat these. I would probably collect these and not repeat them each time, because if we wanted to slide this or make it bigger, we could use that multiplication tool. So if it's 20 for the first one, it'll be 40 for the second one, 60. But if we change the slider, then they would all move. But now you get a sense here for how we can do that. Let's add some of what we saw at the very beginning of the first tutorial. Let's get the volume. So that's an easy thing to do. Here's the object. Here's our solid difference. This actually has that full geometry. And so let's get the volume. That will be this, solve volume properties for a closed B-rep. We can get our geometry, we can get the centroid, and we can get the volume. So for now, let's just set a point here. And I'll show you how to make a tag. And we can get our volume, and we can get our text. What we want to do is to, let's see, under display, we want to do a dimension, and let's do there's 2 and 3D texts. I think we can do a 2D text. So Under dimensions, text tag, we just need a location, the text, and the color. So we want the text is going to be our volume. The location will be a point. This point will be the point that I just drew. So I'll set one point there, set its location. So now we have, and I can hide that point. I might want to turn it back on in a minute. We also want to hide this point. But now we have a display of our volume. And here's where you may want to turn it back on. We can show our points. And we can actually, in 3D, begin to locate this toward the bottom. And a little bit closer. So now we have that volume. If we want, we can copy this point. Over. Then we can use this point for the previous option. Then just connect this, and we can set this point there. So now we see from our first cut to our second cut, we're losing 30 cubic feet. Now, the other thing that I did in the previous iteration was to show the chunk of material that was being cut off. And the way that we can do that is that, again, we will, so as we zoom in, let's group this. And that's actually because we're getting that display. Let's just group this together. And this can be our first box. First cut. We'll group these. This is our second cut. So if I come down from there, what I can actually do is to eliminate the flip and duplicate this and move it down. So let's look at doing that. So what I want to get is another solid difference. So cut that. Actually, let me undo. Why don't I cut or copy all of these? Slide them down. And let's look at what we want to grab from these. First of all, let's grab our list. And we'll put that into B, but without the flip. And we'll pull our first box in, well, we already have that, into A. And we will, let's see, let's move our volume. Let's move, copy our 2 points that are here. 20 in this direction. So let's set this point to here. So that way that text is not on top of one another. And then what we also want to do is we want to move this volume, or move this differenced object down in the Y direction. And actually it's going to be the minus Y direction. Minus 20. Oh, that was subtraction. Let's do minus 20. 30 is less than minus 20. Less than 0. So now we have minus 20 into that factor. And we can see the way that now that took that volume and moved it over. So now we have the move. And our text tag is there. We still have our preview. Let's do one other thing with our preview while we're here. And that is that we want to, again, go take our, let's see, our surface, our analysis, and let's get our brep wireframe. And so we'll take our geometry of that object, and we'll use that for our geometry, for our custom display. We can hide these two other guys here. Let's see, what do we have? We've got a few things turned on. We have our points turned on, so I can hide those. I can hide that point. Our text is working. Now I'm just thinking about that. One point is actually the volume. That's the center of that volume, and I can hide that. This volume too. So now we're getting a number of simultaneous objects within here to be able to display different things that are happening. And so we have our initial volume, we have our volume with one cut, we have the fragment, and we have the volume of each of those. And so we can even come back to our seed values and look at changing those. We'll see those things update both in terms of their size and their location. And so we get that kind of virtual representation between them, and we also get the volume displayed for each of them. And all of these should vary them to some extent. And what's nice about this operation, and again, you just have to kind of work through these issues about grabbing this data, moving from one to one to one to one. And so that then we have this, right? We have this solid difference here, but then we move it over. And maybe that's the trick from before, is that we actually want to grab the move, which is above it. So let's try that. Turn those points back on. Which I think got deleted, but we know that we can copy it. 20. Set this point. And then let's grab the solid difference here, which will be this move that comes into here. There we go. And so all of those things look to be working well. We can even try it once more while we're here. I'm sorry. We'll copy this over. 20. So we have those points. So while we're here, let's just copy this whole thing. We know this needs to move to 3. This needs to move to 40. We can set a little more simply here. It's 40. Let's set our 2 tags. This point on the one above will be here. This one down below will be here. Let's go back to our seed values. And as I mentioned, I think I mentioned, what we're doing is with each of those iterations, they're being set up in a certain way that for each iteration, we're building another set of components there. As we get to something later in the semester, that will become a loop for us. And so what we can do is we'll easily be able to add more cuts and more iterations by just simply using that loop as a way to move through that. The one thing that I'm realizing now is that we need to use the flip. And I guess there's one other option, which would be this into A. That seems right. And now what we want to do is also add an additional move here, because this is moving in Y to bring it down. We want to add a move with 20 in the X direction as well. So we'll swap out this Y for X. We'll bring this move. Then we'll do that. And that's the slider that I used to do minus. This we actually want to be 0 to 20. And now that's in the right position. We can hide this. Sometimes it just takes a matter of going and looking a little bit. So now we can see the fragment from the first cut and the fragment from the second cut, and something else is on, so we'll hide that. And we can see the areas displayed for each of those. All right, we're in good shape. We just have to do that the third time over here on the right, so that that's the right subtraction from those two. So we got it right over here. The solid B rep was from the A list. And the A was from the previous there. And then we just have to do the move again. In this case, it'll be 2 times the X move. So here is 20, the next one will be 40. And again, these could be cleaned up with one type of control to locate all of these different objects in this space. You can see from what we've done, and as I mentioned, all of this later in the semester, I'll show you how to turn this into a loop, because basically this would be the first iteration of the loop, this would be the second iteration of the loop, this would be the third iteration of the loop, or the third count in the loop. And for everything that we've done, relatively simple to do the geometrical exercise, which is up here, which is the actual cutting of the planes. This was the introduction of the random numbers to allow us to prototype it. And then all of this has to do with displaying all of these other objects that'll give us a readout of what we're looking at. And so I think it's helpful, especially when working this way, that we can prototype. But as we work with the random numbers, we can start to be fed some information. We can even start to color code some of these things. If they're above a certain value, it could be color coded. We can work with them in a number of ways. So as we're working at that early stage, we want to get a large number of options, but we also want to be able to start to get some intelligence in terms of the process and in terms of the way that we're working. So I know there were a couple of minor hiccups along the way, but the reality is that you're also going to encounter those when you're doing work. And sometimes it's worth just taking a break, taking a breath, going back and just tracing through things and figuring out where things are. I haven't been doing a lot of labeling just because I don't want to take too long with the tutorial, but labeling those things, labeling some of your parameters and your variables are also really helpful to be able to work through this. But with what we've done, you should be able to replicate these to be able to have as many steps as you want to get to a kind of finished condition for an object at the end. Something like this. All right, so I hope that's helpful. And as always, let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.